Well, hello, and thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to make a cheeseburger soup, and it's made in a crock pot. So the first thing you want to do is you want to spray your crock pot with some cooking spray. And then you want to chop up 1 rib of celery, 1 medium-sized onion, and 1 clove of garlic, and we're going to put that in our electric skillet and just let those vegetables kind of get to till the onions are a little bit translucent. Just let those cook. I sprayed the skillet with the cooking spray as well. I did not add fat to the skillet. This recipe comes from Weight Watchers, but then I add a few things that make it not so much Weight Watchers anymore. But you can Google Weight Watchers cheeseburger soup, and that recipe is really good too. It's snowing out right now. It's actually icing, so I'm making this in the morning, and then I'm just going to have it tonight for dinner, and if we lose power, we can reheat it on our camp stove. If you work, you can put this together really quickly in the morning before you leave, or even the night before, and then when you come home, you already have it in your crock pot. You just turn the crock pot on low, and it only takes 2 hours. You can cook it on the stovetop, but you have to be really careful when you cook this on the stovetop because you don't want your pan to get too hot. If the soup gets overcooked, the cheese will separate and it'll be really yucky. If that does happen, you simply just take a tablespoon of flour, add it to 1/4 cup of the existing soup that you already have made, and mix that all together, and then pour it back into the soup and heat it up for 15 minutes, and that will take care of the separated cheese. So I'm going to tilt this every now and then because today I'm filming by myself. All the kids are out playing in the snow. So we're just going to cook this until the onions are translucent, and that's just because it does cook so quickly and it does cook on low in the crock pot. If you put them in raw, they would never get done. So you just have to give them a little bit of a head start. So I don't know if you can see, oh, it smells good, if you can see or not, but the onions are getting translucent, almost clear, so that you can see through them. So what you're going to do then is you're going to just remove those and put them into your crock pot. And remember, you need to spray the crock pot before you start. Otherwise, you'll have a really hard mess to clean up. Okay, so we have our vegetables in the crock pot. So now we're going to add our ground beef. The original recipe calls for 1 pound of ground beef, but I have a lot of men in my family, so I've always made this with 2 pounds of ground chuck. And again, you're just cooking this until the meat is browned off, separating it. You don't want any large chunks. You want it to be, small little crumbles, like you were making tacos. Just stir it around. If you're using ground beef that produces a lot of fat when you're cooking it, make sure that you drain all that fat off before you put the beef into your crock pot, because it just won't mix well with the cheese and the milk that we'll be adding to it. So you do want to drain the grease off of your ground beef. Now, while this is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the rest of the ingredients. So you're going to need 3 cups of chicken broth. That's going to be divided. You don't use it all at one time. But I wanted to mention that if you're in the grocery store and you're looking for chicken broth already in the package ready to use, you'll also see chicken stock. Chicken stock is going to have more fat in it, and it's going to have more calories. So this recipe, like I said, was a Weight Watchers recipe, so it started with broth, and that's what I've always used. I've used the boxes of broth. I've used the little cubes of broth that you mix with water. There's no difference in taste, really, because it's the hamburger and the cheese take over. all of the flavors. So use whatever you have. You can even use the chicken broth from when we made the buttermilk fried chicken, or if you've made anything else where you had to cook your chicken in water beforehand, and you can just add that. Alright, so we're going to let that cook for just a little bit until it's completely, thoroughly done. You want it cooked all the way through. And while this is cooking, you can go ahead and measure out, step back here for a minute, you can go ahead and measure out 2½ cups of chicken broth in one container, and then you're going to need ½ cup separately. And to that ½ cup, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of plain flour and mix that up to help make a roux, to thickener for our soup. You're also going to need for this recipe, the original recipe calls for salt, pepper, and paprika. I like to add our favorite hamburger seasoning, which we have several, but today I'm going to be using Montreal steak, which is a really good seasoning for hamburgers and for steak. So you're going to need a seasoning or salt, pepper, and paprika. You're also going to need a can of evaporated milk, and then my family likes to add, they like for me to add a can of diced tomatoes, just plain, no flavoring, just diced tomatoes. You don't have to put the tomatoes in it. It's totally up to you. You can even add bacon to this recipe and have bacon cheeseburger soup. When I do that, I normally buy the bacon that's already cooked and just cut it up and add it at the end so that it doesn't get all slimy and, you know, overcooked. So just if you want to add bacon, you can add that at the very end. You could even just serve it with crumbles of bacon, and people can put it on their soup if they want it or not. The other ingredient you're going to need is cheese, because it is cheeseburger soup. The recipe calls for 8 ounces of shredded cheese. Of course I'm using double the beef, so I use 10 ounces of sharp cheddar, and then I add 4 ounces of Velveeta, or a processed cheese like that, but creamiest, melts really easily. And that's all of your ingredients that you're going to need. It's really easy to make. Once you get your hamburger cooked, it goes together really quick. So one thing, if you work, one thing you could do is on the weekends, you could brown off some ground beef and then freeze it. You could freeze it by the pound, and then you would have it for your recipes for when you get home from work, or to take out in the morning and put together before you go to work. You can also do that with your chicken broth. One idea for your chicken broth, if you have the old-fashioned ice trays that make ice cubes, you can take your chicken broth, once it's cooled down, pour it into the ice cube trays, put it in the freezer, let it freeze. Once it's hardened, pop them out of the tray, put them in Ziploc bags, because if you measure it, the traditional ice cube trays are maybe just a little bit over a tablespoon of liquid, and you could even measure it out if you wanted to. But then you know if you need 1/4 cup of chicken broth in a hurry, you could just take out 3 ice cubes and you've got about 1/4 cup. The little things like that can really help if you're very busy, if you work and don't get home until 6:30, maybe even later. Or even if you stay at home but you have kids with a lot of activities. It's always nice to have something you can just pull out of your freezer and whip up a really quick meal. Okay, so our hamburger's cooked. So we're going to add that to our crock pot. Just throw it in over the vegetables, and I'm just kind of draining off any of the excess fat. You can leave a little bit in your pan because we're going to make the actual soup part next. And it's nice to have a little bit of fat, but you don't want all this fat in your soup. It just would be too much. Okay, so there's a little extra fat in this pan, so I'm just going to pour that off and leave maybe a tablespoon of fat in the pan. All right, so can you see there? There's maybe a tablespoon of fat left in the pan. So now we're going to take our half cup of chicken broth and we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour to it. And I'm going to take a little whisk and just get all that combined together with no lumps. Get it all mixed together. And this is what is going to make your soup thick, because you don't want this to be a thin soup. This should be a thick, creamy, really nice on the tongue texture. So once you have all of the flour combined with the chicken broth, I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit to maybe 300. I'm going to add that to the frying pan, as well as the other 2.5 cups of chicken broth. I'm going to take a wooden spoon and I'm just going to get all that fried beef, that little tiny pieces that are left that you can't really get out with a slotted spoon. And we're just going to stir all of that together. Now I'm going to turn the heat back up a little bit to about 400 so that it will start to thicken and get all incorporated together. Can you see that? It's just chicken broth and flour at this point, and then all the little pieces of meat that I couldn't get out. So just stir that up, and once you see that there's no lumps, you don't want any lumps in this, and that it all looks to be mixed together well, we're going to add that to our crock pot and just pour it right over the beef. Okay, so we're done with the frying pan. I'll get that out of our way. Pull this over where maybe you can see it better. So it's just the vegetables, the beef, and the chicken broth that's been heated with the flour. So I'm going to stir that together. And to that, we're going to add a can of evaporated milk. Always make sure that you shake the evaporated milk up really well before you open it. It even says it on the top of the can, shake well. It's because the solids will settle down to the bottom. All right, so pour 1 can of evaporated milk. Give it a stir. And then we're going to add 1 can of diced tomatoes. Give it a stir. And then to that I'm going to add my 10 ounces of sharp cheddar cheese, grated. I don't know if you can see it, that's grated cheese. And then I have about 4 ounces of Velveeta that I have cubed up. So dump that right in there. And we're going to add about a tablespoon of my Montreal steak. Or you can add the paprika, salt and pepper. And that's just to taste. I like a lot of pepper, some people don't. This Montreal, I don't know if it does not have salt in it, so I'm actually going to add some salt too. Just a little sprinkling. Stir it all up. You're going to put this in your crock pot, turn it on low, and it's going to cook for 2 hours on low. But like I said, as is, you can just cover it, stick it in your fridge, and then bring it out whenever you want a nice hearty meal. That's super easy. And just put it in your crock pot, turn it on low. Don't cook it on high. Don't think, well, I can cook it on high for an hour. No. You want to cook it on low for 2 hours so that the cheese does not separate. And you can add other items to it that you maybe like. But this is just what it looks like all together. And then you'll just heat it for 2 hours. You can serve it with tortilla chips, really good, a nice big salad, and you have your cheeseburger soup. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.